We've got a special task in front of us. As many of you will see in your folder, we had a letter from the Speaker, but I think it's going to be better to let the Speaker, Mr. Speaker, if you will, come and tell us the charge that you've gotten in mind for this committee this year, and welcome. We appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you very much. I don't get to do this very often, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for letting me visit with you just a few minutes this afternoon. At the time that I was elected to this position about two and a half years ago, when I was talking to members of the House throughout that process, one of the things that kept coming up in our discussions was that many members felt that we needed a stronger and more intense focus on the problems of small business here in Georgia. And it was a result of many of those discussions that I decided to create this committee and to charge it with looking after the interest of small businesses here in our state, and to put an emphasis on identifying policies that would help grow jobs here in Georgia in the private sector. And I want to thank the committee for its good work over the last 2 years. I want to thank Chairman Knight for his service, and for all the members of this committee. And I felt like that the initiative that I wanted to undertake and outline to you today was perfectly suited for not only the mission of this committee, but also that this committee, of the individuals that make up this committee. And so that's kind of what I wanted to chat with you about today in just a few minutes' time. As I have traveled over the state over the last year or two, I've had the great privilege of meeting with many Georgians who own small businesses. And I've had a lot of conversations with those Georgians. And one thing that keeps recurring in those discussions is the problems that many small businesses here in our state have with rules and regulations that state government adopts and imposes upon them, as well as what I just refer to as red tape. These are regulations and burdens that are costing small businesses money, costing them to invest in additional personnel to comply with, and many times forcing them to cut back in other areas. And I think there is a real and serious problem out there in our economy. And so what I have decided to do is to ask this committee, and you have the letter before you, to undertake what I'm describing as a red tape watch. I am asking this committee to make a priority this session of drilling down into these problems of over-regulation in our economy here in the state from the state level, and to identify, as to the extent that you can, rules and regulations that are unduly burdensome, that are imposing hardships on our small businesses, and also to take a look at what kind of test that we ought to have in mind as we go forward in enacting rules and regs that we then impose on businesses all across the state. I view this as the second part of something that we launched a couple of years ago, and that was our tax reform efforts here in the House. I'm very proud of the leadership role that this House, on a bipartisan basis, has had in looking at ways at making our state tax code more competitive, so that Georgia can compete for jobs, for job growth, and so that Georgia businesses can maintain the levels of employment that they have. I think that Georgians expect us to be about looking at ways that we can create an economic climate that fosters growth of small businesses and job growth. You know, if you believe in public opinion polls, every public opinion poll I have seen, Georgians are far, far away are looking for us to give leadership on that issue, and I think tax reform was a good first step. This is what I view to be the second part of that, is to look in an in-depth way at reforming our regulatory system here in the state. And I want this work to be intensive. I want it to be thorough, and I want this committee to leave no stone unturned as you go through this process, to look at what we can do to ask the tough questions about our regulatory system here in Georgia from the state level. I know we can't work wonders or can't do much about the federal level of this problem, but I think that it's incumbent upon us in these leadership positions that we look at what we can do from the state level, and that's what I'm asking you to do. I know that Chairman Knight has arranged for many of the business groups here in the state to come in and give you their perspective and share information if they can with you. What I've also asked him to do, though, is to reach out to the members of the House. I know that every one of you have people in your districts, constituents back home in your districts, that have complained to you about this issue. This is a time to give their complaints voice, and so he and I have talked about how valuable it would be and how helpful it would be to this committee to invite these Georgians here to this room, to this table, and let them describe for you the problems they're having surviving under over-burdensome regulations, over regulations and red tape that are strangling their growth, and then take that information as you go forward and come back to the House with recommendations and tell us what you have found and what you recommend and what you propose, so that we can then have a good full debate in the House about ways that we can improve our economy here in Georgia and ways that we can put Georgians to work. I want to commend Governor Deal's competitiveness initiatives. I think he has some ideas that are long overdue at the state level. And I view this as being a partnership with the administration as we go forward. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for this time. Thank you for the opportunity of addressing your committee, and I look forward to some good work from this group as you go forward. This is let me just close by saying that the red tape watch is a priority. To me, it's a priority to the leadership in the House. That's why it was important for me to come here today and talk to you, because I don't think other than adopting a budget, reforming education, reforming our criminal justice system, that there's nothing more important we can do to help the people we represent this session. So Godspeed to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and the members of the committee. Mr.
Speaker, we want to thank you and honor that you've bestowed upon this committee to do this work. It is very important to Georgia, and I think this committee's heard it. We're going to be up for the task, and we appreciate you and the resources that you put behind this. And later on, we're going to reveal a website that we can spread across Georgia to make sure that all Georgians, all our entrepreneurs, have an opportunity to voice their concerns over the regulation in Georgia. Again, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. Thank you.
Well, I think the committee has definitely heard the charge, and what I'd like to do today is we're going to briefly hear from two groups. The first group is going to be the NFIB presentation. Kyle, were you? Okay. And members, if you'll look in your folders, I think there's a copy of the NFIB presentation.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Well, thank you for being here.
I appreciate being the guy that gets to follow the speaker. That's kind of a tough act to follow, but appreciate the work that you all are doing and are about to do Regulatory reform is obviously an important issue to Georgia small employers. Mr. Chairman and members of the House Committee on Small Business Development Job Creation, my name is Kyle Jackson, and I am the State Director for the Georgia chapter of the National Federation of Independent Business. It's my pleasure to appear before you today on behalf of NFIB Georgia, the state's largest issue advocacy organization dedicated to advancing free enterprise in the interests of Georgia's small business community. The NFIB membership spans the spectrum of the business community, ranging from sole proprietorships to substantially independently held enterprises. We have members who represent every sector of the economy and provide the goods, labor, and services that make the Georgia economy run. Additionally, the typical NFIB member employs fewer than 10 workers and grosses less than $1 million in annual sales. Regulatory reform is not what many people would consider a quote-unquote sexy issue when compared to other headline-grabbing issues such as tax reform, tort reform, and health care. However, the regulatory climate and the perception of the state's regulatory climate can have a tremendous negative or positive impact on job growth and creation. The U.S. Small Business Administration estimates rules and regulations cost small business on average 40% more per employee to comply with than their large business counterparts. The 2010 SBA study on the impact of regulatory costs on small firms estimates that the average small employer, and they term that those with fewer than 20 employees, spends roughly $10,585 per employee per year on regulatory compliance for a national total cost of $1.75 trillion. So we're talking about a lot of money. Adding to the concern regarding excessive regulation, a late 2011 Gallup survey reported that small business owners found regulation to be the most important problem facing their business. The monthly NFIB Research Foundation poll of small business challenges also shows small employers consistently rank governmental requirements and red tape as the second most important problem facing their business. These studies demonstrate to me that the government regulations have a financial impact on our small businesses and are hindering our economic recovery. For Georgia to compete in today's global economy and continue to attract jobs and businesses, our state must have regulatory policies that strike a balance between the state government's priorities and the ability of small business to comply with reasonable regulations. When considering the impact of regulations upon the average small business, it is important to understand that unlike large companies, a small business owner often serves as the salesperson, human resources director, accountant, janitor, advertiser, manager, and everything in between. When you factor in the important role that a business owner plays in making sure his or her business is in compliance with federal, state, county, and local tax laws, workers' compensation laws, environmental laws, and the literally thousands of regulations on the books in Georgia, you can quickly get a sense of how rapidly individual regulations can turn into a serious hurdle of job creation. In addition to the SBA numbers I previously cited, our internal research foundation put together a study called Small Business Coping with Regulations and found a number of interesting items. And I'm not going to, there's a lot of stuff here, I'm not going to read all of it, but the few that I would point out, one, the federal government is considered the primary culprit at 49%. State government falls in culpability at 35%, and then state and local regulations create the fewest problems at 13%. About half see their regulatory problem as the overall volume of regulations emanating from a plethora of government agencies. The other half view it as few as specific regulations coming from one or two agencies. And finally, small business owners, most often at 36%, identify tax-related regulations, federal, state, and local, as the most burdensome type of regulation. Operational regulations such as occupational licensing and rules governing the conduct of a particular industry are cited with the next greatest frequency at 21%. Environmental and land use regulations follow at 17%, health and safety at 11%, and regulations associated with the terms and conditions of employment follow at 9%. And as I said, there's lots more numbers in there. I'm not going to bore you with all of it, but there's some good stuff. While the numbers I cited in my testimony are from large national surveys, one can surmise that Georgia employers would have a similar response and experience relative to regulations. However, I am currently working on a Georgia-specific survey that will hopefully help you all advance the discussion in your efforts to identify and eliminate unnecessary, burdensome, or costly state regulations. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I thank you for your efforts to examine the state regulatory climate and your commitment to streamlining regulations and helping Georgia's small employers do what they do best, create jobs. On behalf of the nearly 8,000 members of NFIB Georgia, I thank you for your time and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Well, first of all, we want to thank you for being a part of this, and certainly the statistics and the information that you bring from your members is very valuable to this committee, and we look forward to the partnership with you and your organization to go forward in this measure. Are there any comments or questions from committee members? All right, Kyle. Hold on, we do have one. Representative Flood.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Jackson, for your report to us. I know that in your analysis you pointed out the concerns that small businesses express over overburdens of regulations both from federal and state agencies. Did you do any analysis as to what they saw as the most egregious kinds of regulations?
I think it would vary by industry, honestly, Representative. Certain industries are obviously more regulated than others, so I don't know that I can give you a snapshot of generically what small business sees as the most burdensome type of regulation. Honestly, I think it's the piling on effect. It's not the one individual regulation. It's the fact that every year we continue to add more and more onto the books, and at some point it just becomes unreasonable for small businesses to have a 100% compliance rate. And I think it's really the piling on effect that's become the most challenging thing for small employers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jackson, look forward to your continued input. I think it's going to be very valuable to what we're trying to do here. Have you guys, or I would encourage you to, if you hadn't already, looked at what other states have done to look at regulations that maybe they have cut that have helped small businesses. Obviously, we're competing with the states around us for small businesses and small and emerging and growing businesses as well too. So, so the question is, have you done that? If you have, can you share that information with us? If not, is that something that you can take a good look at as we go through this process?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Representative, absolutely. I'm very cognizant of the fact that we are competing against our neighbors in other states as well. And one of the things that I've done is pulled some together other reform efforts that states have done, and that actually brings me to another important point. It's important to analyze what we have today, currently on the books, that's causing problems. But it's equally important, I think, is to put into place a structure going forward that will help us to identify potentially burdensome regulations and come up with maybe a different way of achieving those regulatory outcomes going forward. So identifying the problems today and identifying a structure going forward that will help us avoid this problem in the future, I think, are both of paramount importance.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your report. The one thing I would like to ask, so how do we have small businesses paying more by a good part than large businesses? How do, I guess I'm asking, how do government regulations cost small businesses more?
That's a tremendous question, Representative. The reality is that when small business is juxtaposed against their large business counterparts, they don't have in-house legal counsel. Oftentimes they don't have in-house people charged with compliance, and so the reality is that it takes a small business longer and more man hours to comply with regulations than corporate America does, and that's where I think you just see the disparity in those numbers.
Okay, thank you. That's
Representative Drenner.
I don't think it's okay. I appreciate your testimony, and but is it not true that the government does send assistance to small businesses to help with compliance issues? For example, Georgia Tech has an outreach program that goes in and helps many businesses with OSHA and EPA compliance issues.
Mr. Chair and Representative, there are certainly some resources available. Some agencies actually have a great ombudsman program. However, not all agencies do. And part of the problem, too, is that when you are a small business owner, you want to get the answer and the quickest solution. And sometimes that means you don't have the time to go research other resources that are available. And I guess I would put to you all that our small business community is better served if we can try to avoid burdensome regulations on the front end, so we don't have the same problem that you alluded to on the back end of folks trying to figure out what does this mean for my business and how do I comply.
All right. Is that Representative Bruce?
Thank you for coming. Can you, given what the speaker asked us to do this morning was to look at specific rules and regulations and things, can you give us, like one or two examples of something specific that you think we should be looking at and that may need to be fixed or go away or whatever? Can you kind of just give us a quick example?
Mr. Chairman, to the representative, I actually think I can. What my members can do better than me is help you identify those things. And so one of the things that I will be working to do throughout this process is to get my members from around the state and hopefully from different types of industries to answer that very question. Because we can talk about the regulatory structure and this nebulous term of regulatory reform, but I think it's absolutely important that you all hear from actual employers, because nobody can better illustrate the challenges they face than the employer themselves.
All right.
Okay.
Mr. Jackson, we appreciate that, and I think wrapping that up on the final note of helping us drill back down to the individual businesses, that's what this committee is going to do, and we're going to listen with everyone's help here, and certainly with the members in this body going out and seeking members, entrepreneurs from their areas to come back in and testify. Hopefully, we're going to drill back down to those regulations. So, thank you for your presentation, your time. This committee looks forward to working with you and the NFIB and this effort.
Mr. Chairman, same here. Thank you for all your work.
All right. Our next presenter, David Rayner from the Georgia Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to commend the speaker for his leadership on the issue of regulatory reform, and also would like to commend the chair in this committee for taking on this giant task of looking at some of the more burdensome regulations that most of our businesses have to comply with. Little known fact about the Georgia Chamber of Commerce is that over 60% of our membership are classified as small businesses, so we really do have a large stake in this effort moving forward. Mr. Jackson, I think, effectively laid out some of the challenges that overly burdensome regulations present to the small business community. In fact, according to the Competitive Enterprise Institute, U.S. federal regulatory compliance costs hit the $1.75 billion mark in 2008, which absorbed 11.9% of the 2010 U.S. domestic product. Agency regulation frequently stifles business and unnecessary and inefficient rules which drastically increase the cost of of conducting business. Throughout the summer, the Chamber was a partner with the Governor's Office and the Georgia Department of Economic Development in the Governor's Competitiveness Initiative. We went to each of the 12 economic development regions throughout the state and heard from local business leaders, community leaders, on some issues that could be addressed to make Georgia more competitively with our economy and through growing jobs and growing our businesses. And regulatory reform was a repeated issue that was brought before us. Specifically, I think, to Representative Bruce's question, some of the things with regards to the permitting processes, gaining permits within various industry sectors has been challenging. Knowing exactly where your permit is in the process. We've seen anywhere from 6 months to a year to 18 months that businesses are waiting to get permits granted. So that would be one area that I would direct your attention to. The Chamber, moving forward in this effort, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, has a couple of resources that we would like to offer to the committee. The first of which would be our ad hoc committee that we have within our Governmental Affairs Council, made up of our local chamber partners. And we have a few of those local chamber partners in the audience. I would ask that they raise their hand if they would, that they would be willing to help identify those small business owners throughout the state who have seen firsthand how overly burdensome these regulations could be. Also, the Chamber of Commerce has a small business council, which is made up of some of the small business leaders or small business leadership at the Georgia Chamber of Commerce. So we would certainly offer those and any other resources that you could think of or that we have at the organization to help you look to lift some of these overly burdensome regulations so that we can continue to grow and create jobs and further the economic vitality of the state of Georgia. So I appreciate your time today, and look forward to any questions that you may have for me.
Mr. Rayner, thank you, and I appreciate the members in the audience who from your organization have come. We look forward to working with you and certainly welcome your resources as well. So with that, we'll take a few questions from members. Who's 16? Representative Henson.
Thank you. Thank you very much for presenting. Going back to the issue that Representative Bruce had brought up in terms of permits and knowing where your permits are in the process, isn't that also a problem that big businesses have?
Oh, absolutely.
So, I mean, it is a problem, period,
Right.
in Georgia, regardless of the size of your business.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I think what we're looking for is what is specific to small businesses in terms of problems that big businesses don't encounter. And, you know, I've listened to NFIB, I've just listened to you, and I'm just wondering if you could possibly give us a few examples of something that small businesses encounter that big businesses do not.
We have currently reached out to our members of our Small Business Council, and our local chamber partners will be working in the next week before the next hearing here to identify those members to come before us to identify those specific examples as well. So I know that was a more broader example with the permitting issue, but we will have those individuals at a subsequent meeting that will be here to comment to those specifics.
Thank you.
Representative Henson, you bring up a point, but some of these things, whether it's small or big business, I think some of the solutions that hopefully this committee will find will help all Georgia businesses, no matter if it's small or large. With that,
Mr. Chairman, I think my question is directed at you. For the purposes of our discussion, is a small business defined as employees less than 10 people? Or how exactly are we looking at what a small business is? Is it a dollar amount?
I don't think we've defined that yet. I know that there are places in the code that, particularly to maybe contracts and things, that will look at that, but I think for the purposes of right now, looking at what we're doing, we know that small businesses are the majority of the businesses that employ everybody in the state, and you're probably looking at 50 or less employees.
To your point, Mr. Chairman, I think it varies in the code. I think you've got instances where it's defined as 100 or less, 50 or less. I know the Small Business Administration, for their purposes, uses the definition of 500 employees or less as a small business.
Well, for example, OSHA uses 10 employees to define a small business, and my last comment would be that compliance issues are extremely complex with regard to environmental regulations, and to be able to streamline some of these processes that you are alluding to, I think would be of great benefit to our state, personally.
Thank you. Representative Harden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I think Representative Drenner asked basically what I wanted to ask, and that was, I noticed that the NFIB gentleman said that their members employ fewer than 10 and gross over $1 million in sales, or less than $1 million in sales. But small businesses do go much larger, and I think this fits in also with what the Representative Henson said, and that is we're looking for regulations and rules that hamper business development and job creation, regardless, I think, of the size. But certainly if they apply to small businesses, they're going to apply to large businesses too. It's just that, as we heard, maybe they have a little better organization to handle these problems and it costs them less money. But I think we'll need to be looking at all businesses, basically.
Right. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Representative Bruce.
Yeah, this is kind of a joint question for you, Mr. Chairman, as well as I heard the charge from the speaker in terms of looking at regulations, but I've heard him also say in other settings, I didn't hear it today, but I've heard in other settings where he was talking about, in addition to doing this, that we would also try to come up with ideas on how to spur and create new business opportunities as well. Not just how do we make the ones that exist do better and last longer, but how do we come up with new concepts, new ideas, new things that will allow or invite businesses to people to invest, basically. And I want to make sure we don't that we don't lose that, because I think that's very important. And the question to you was whether or not there are things that the Georgia Chamber has in place that we might be able to learn from you, as we go through, on concepts and ideas on how to inspire, or whatever the word is, other people to invest and create these new businesses that we're talking about.
Absolutely. We have a public policy department within the chamber that would be happy to come, if it be the will of the chair and the committee, to come and present along those lines, many of which too were laid out through our legislative priorities. I believe for those individuals that attended our Eggs and Issues breakfast this year, some of the proactive policy pieces that we will be pursuing during this legislative session. So.
Thank you. And Representative Bruce, I know that's I've had a lot of comments and a lot of people, both from out in the hall to our own members, come up and give ideas. And I think this committee is certainly probably the committee to do exactly what you've talked about, is look for incentives and things to do. But I do want to make sure that we do look at and make sure we stick to the speaker's charge. And I think that for this initiative specifically, we need to make sure that we're doing the thorough review and intensive evaluation of our regulations in Georgia. That was in his charge, and I will remind you, if we look at our letter from the speaker as far as the charge of this committee from this instance. But with that, Representative Bruce, we will also look for other initiatives and other ways to spur business on and give them an incentive to come here and do business in Georgia. Mm-hmm. What number?
Real quick, we have, the angel tax credit we have, and in fact, we've got a bill that the Chamber's, it's a venture capital bill that's purely set up for that, to be able to provide access to capital for small businesses to grow. So we may not address it in this committee, but we are doing it in some other committees too.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm sorry, this committee looks forward to working with the Chamber and your resources as well, so that we can make sure that we're taking care of business in Georgia.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Members.
With that, committee members, we, as the speaker was charging the committee, in the end, we made reference to the resources that they've made available. And certainly the speaker has made it known that we want to go all across Georgia looking for our citizens, our business owners, our entrepreneurs, to hear from them of what burdensome regulation that they're running up against. And part of the resources that they have given to this committee is through our invitation out to the state. And we were doing that electronically. So what we're going to do is we're going to roll out a website, and our committee aide, Janae Burke, is going to bring that up on the screen, and we're going to talk about that website and how Georgia citizens can contact us directly and request to come and testify before this committee.
You just go to the main website. As you can see, it pops up. It's on the main page. It's called Red Tape Watch. The website address for that is www.house.ga.gov/redtapewatch. And if you click on that link, it will give you all the information to fill out. If you want to testify, the name of your business, the address, city, state, you describe it, the size of your business. And we specifically want to know which regulations are burdensome, which ones are causing you problems. And there's a space for all that information there. And when you submit it, it comes to my inbox, and we can log it in, and then we have all the information and can go over it that way. And there's also a link that I think when you submit it, it goes to, it takes you to the committee's website. As you can see on the website, there's also a link where you can fill it in there as well, and it lists all the members of the committee, so that if anyone has any questions, they can contact you guys.
Again, members and those here today that are going to help us in this effort, let's make sure as we get this out to our citizens that we do get a little bit of this information back. We need to know what the business is, the type of business, and specifically, let's try to drill down on the specific regulation, code section, whatever it is that is being a burden to these entrepreneurs. so that this committee can do the intensive research that we need to and look at this regulation. So with that, I appreciate what resources we've been put forth to this committee. Certainly, I think it tells of the desire of leadership to pursue this. So, with that, I want to charge the committee to and all members of the House, please go out into your districts, your communities, and look for our small business members that are having problems, and let's see if we can't get them back here. We are scheduled for a meeting on Thursday, February the 2nd here. We have blocked off 3 hours to hear from people out across this state, and we want to get them in here to testify about what their problems they're having with Georgia regulation. So I want to charge the members to diligently go out there and look and bring back those members. And let's have a good meeting next week and see if we can drill down on some of these issues. With that, is there any other comments? 23. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to find out, like with the website, if it's not a specific code section, but it's actually a policy or process that's been developed within one of the agencies, how would they be able to put that without having the actual, regulation or the specific, bill that was written to address the issue?
I believe if you look at it, we have passed this letter out, and we were also mailing this to the membership. If it has it already been mailed to the membership?
Yes.
That we're asking for the specific departments of agencies of concern and/or the specific laws or regulation.
Okay, so that website has that
yes,
set up. Okay.
That has the setup here.
Okay. And then I also wanted to say, I think it's a good idea for members of the committee to work with their local chambers and, maybe do press releases in their community to, make sure that the entire community is aware of,
yes,
this initiative so that we can reach out locally to different industries. And, speaking to some of the questions that some of the other reps had about, small versus large business, I think that it will benefit all businesses. It's just more pronounced in the small businesses because, they are trying to be all things to, to the company and get everything done, and a lot of times don't have the time to do the things they need to do. So I'm looking forward to working on this. So
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Braddock. Representative Harden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that I've run into as I've talked to people is sometimes it's not the regulation itself, but it's the communication between different departments of government that is slowing the process of their getting the things they need to go into business. Just as an example, you might have a construction project that's delayed because of environmental regulations, and then so if those two departments are not communicating, then it can cause long delays. So we need to hear if there are examples of that also.
I agree, Representative Harden. Thank you. And 17. I'm 17, but I'm not. Okay. All right. Well, with that, and committee members, we've got we've been charged with a large task this year. I know this committee is going to be up for it, and there's probably going to be a lot of hard work and plenty of meetings to hear from people all across Georgia. So get ready, and we look forward to the Thursday meeting. With that, we are adjourned.